Hey everyone! It is 1:30 on the East Coast. I don't know what time it is where you are, but we are plugging along with this event. And I am so excited to have this guy here again. So, if you came to last year's Vet Summit, you know Scott Vedder. His session on resumes last year was one of the highest rated ones that we had. And so I had to go back to him this year and say, hey, can you do something on interviews now? So he's going to give you a really just an awesome take about how to make really, really great interviews that stick out, that work, make interviews. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Anyway, I'm going to let the guy who can talk do the talking from here out. So everybody welcome Scott Vedder.
Thank you so much, Jordana. It's great to be back here with the Recon Network and to see some friendly faces, not strangers in the room for sure. Thanks, Brian, for being here. It's good to see you again, Bruce. And for those of you I haven't met yet, yes, I'm Scott. I wrote a book. That's me. I'm on a book. And much like my headshot for this, that headshot's a little outdated. I'm sporting my new COVID do or post-COVID do here in the new world we're in. But it's so great to be here and talking about interviews. And I want to make this interactive too. I'm not going to talk at you. I want to talk with you over the course of our time together. So I'd like you to use the chat function here and just put one word in the chat that represents how you feel about job interviews. And you're amongst friends, so this is a safe place. You could say whatever word comes to mind when you think about job interviews. Go ahead and put that word in the chat. When I say job interviews to you, what word comes to mind? Don says opportunity. Very good. What other words might come to mind when you hear the word job interview? Unsure. Other Donald says unsure. Very good. Thank you for that. What else? What other words might come to mind? Rewarding, Heather. Very nice. Any other words come to mind when we think of the words job interview? Interrogation, says Bruce. Yes. Not something I haven't heard before. And I think that it's a very common experience for people to feel that way. Sean, if you're feeling it, you're new to it. And Brett, you're feeling confident already. That's great. We're going to build on whatever skills you have today. And we're also going to give you new tools to help you think through job interview processes. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat right now. I'm going to have with me alongside a document that's my top 5 tips for job interviews. And I'd encourage you to download. It's just a PDF and you can follow along so that I'll save you some of the note taking, I hope. But that's on my website at scottvedder.com on the free stuff page. I've got a lot of free tips, and these top 5 tips are one of the documents you'll find there. This is particularly for veterans. So let's do a little bit of talk about some numbers. And of course, here's some numbers. They start with 100. That stands for the Fortune 100. That's where I worked as a recruiter. I did over 5,000 interviews before I stopped counting, and most people's resumes are awful. And that's not unique to veterans or civilians. That's just most people don't know what I'm looking for and how I use that information. So I wrote a book about resumes really to vent my own frustrations, but also because I knew it would help people. And it took off. It became a bestseller. And on the book tour, I'd always meet veterans. They'd say, what about us? It's different. And that's what brings me here today. I'll talk more about my history as a civilian advocate in a moment. If I'm going to do 5,000 interviews at a Fortune 100 company, how many resumes do you think I might have to? Oh yeah, here. Okay, it doesn't look like that link I posted. How many resumes do you think I might have to sort through? Thank you, Heather. In order to figure out which 5,000 candidates to interview, just take a guess. How many resumes do you think I might be sorting through to find 5,000 candidates to interview? Put it in the chat there. At a Fortune 100 company, just guess a number. Let's just have a little fun with it. How many resumes might I sort through to get to 5,000 candidates to interview? You've heard there's a lot of people who apply. Could be 100,000, could be 2 million, says Bruce. Any other guesses? No? Okay. Well, what I'll tell you is it could be 1 million. You see what I did there? That's on the screen. It's another number there. But I don't know if it's 1 million candidates for every job, but certainly the reality is that at a big company like a Fortune 100 company, there's 100, 200, 300 people applying for every position that we post. So most people are not even getting an interview. That's why I started my journey helping people with resumes, and I wrote a #1 best-selling resume book. That's #1 there. But it also, the #1 represents you, because you're the only one who you are focused on in your job search. You want other candidates to enjoy success, but you want to be the one who gets the job. And I'll tell you today how to stand out from the competition and really tell your story in a job interview successfully. So one more number I'll show you here, and that's 1600. It stands for 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, an address I'm sure you're familiar with. I had the honor and privilege of meeting First Lady Michelle Obama at the Veterans Institute way back in 2013, and got the selfie of the century there when I still had hair. And I said, hey, could I help follow up and be a resource for veterans? And she liked what I had to say. In fact, I earned myself a personal invitation to meet in the office of the First Lady at the White House and at the office of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon for their Warrior and Family Support Program. No government endorsement implied, of course. Just a matter of fact that I was tapped into as a resource along the way to say, hey, can you help veterans even more broadly than you're already doing? And I said, absolutely. So it was my pleasure to be awarded a kiss by Sonny Obama, the president's dog, for thanking me for helping veterans at the White House. But importantly, it's been part of my journey now, ever since then, really to become a strong and outspoken civilian advocate for veterans and military spouses. I, in fact, was invited back to the last White House, this time during a Republican administration, where I delivered a version of the presentation we'll see today for the White House Military Office, the WHAMO. And this time, the president didn't have a dog, but he did have a great restaurant. And so I was treated to lunch at the West Wing in the White House Navy mess, and you get presidential M&Ms when you leave. All red, white, and blue, of course. But my journey really starts with these two guys, and that's my dad and my grandfather, Jack, from my mother's side, both of whom served in the Army. Dad enlisted during the Vietnam era, and Jack Wingate, was drafted and served as a medic in the Philippines during World War II. And nobody helped them when they got back. There were no transition programs. There was no Veteran Employment Transition Summit in 1947. So thank you, Jordana, for making today's story a different story for today's vets. And that's what I've made it my cause to do, is to help you have an easier transition than my family had, because they struggled in their transition and they never really capitalized on all the value they brought from the military into the civilian workforce. Which brings us to you here today. We're here to talk about all of you and how can you stand out when there's a very crowded field of applicants. There's resumes coming in from all over the place, and all the resumes look the same. All the candidates sound a little similar sometimes in an interview if they're just reading off canned answers and what they think recruiters want to hear. But the reality is we need to stand out. We need to really pop out from the competition. And the way to do that is using the signs of a great interview. Now, you might be wondering, why is there a cartoon resume here if we're talking about interviews, Scott? And why does he look like he's cursing at me? Well, he's not cursing. And he's showing you what the signs of a great resume are as a way to describe how to prepare for the signs of a great interview, which are the same signs. And let's talk about what these symbols mean. I have them here on my wall as a reminder that we can look at throughout the program today. But this is my #1 tip on that worksheet I sent. What is the best tip for interviews? Well, it's to use the signs of a great interview to tell a story that quantifies your experience with specifics. So let's look through each of these signs. The exclamation point is the wow parts of your experience, things that only you could say. They're amazing and uniquely qualify you for a position. At what point did you gain the most relevant experience for the job? Again, it's making sure that you're tying your past experiences to the qualifications that are needed in the job. The numbers that quantify and prove your past successes. The dollar value of your contributions when you know them. That doesn't always apply, certainly, when you're coming from a non-profit generating or oriented organization like the military. Just telling me, oh, it was a $4 billion budget doesn't necessarily help. It's about what was your role in that monetary value back to the military, perhaps, or whatever or other organization you're describing. And of course, the percents, figures that easily show growth and results. When you use the signs of a great interview to tell a story about why you're qualified, it helps the recruiters solve the most common problem that we face, which is very simply, we walk out of a job interview and the candidate leaves and we go, I don't know if they can do this or not. And as we talk to each other, it's very often like, well, we got a bunch of definitions of stuff and we got some generalized answers or what they would do or might do in a scenario, but we actually don't have any proof that they're any good at this thing. And the signs of a great interview solve that problem. It gives us tangible information and really helps to articulate examples of your past experiences and success, which are typically the best indicators of your potential for future success. And if you need to remember what the signs of a great interview are, you just look down at your keyboard there above the numbers 1 through 5. I came up with that. That's clever, right? Those are the signs of a great interview. So when you're thinking about how to prepare for interviews and what kinds of things you might want to talk about, filter it through, thank you, Justin, filter it through the signs of a great interview and ask yourself, am I giving examples that will help really articulate what I did that was a wow? Will they know at what point I gained the best experience? And have I included some numbers or dollars and percent that help to quantify my experience? Is it clear that what I'm doing is using this to tell a story that speaks for itself? And these signs of a great interview, we will keep in our mind as we go through the rest of our content today as a clever way and just a simple way to get to the real truth of why you're a great candidate for a job. It's the evidence of your success. Now, I've said you can use these to prepare stories, and you might be wondering, well, what questions should I prepare to answer with the signs of a great interview? And if you right now just opened a new tab and went to Google and just typed sample interview questions, you'd end up with 8 million pages of results and hundreds of thousands of questions that you could consider. And that's not really a good plan to have as far as what you might prepare for. So I don't want you to prepare to answer hundreds of thousands of questions. I really only want you to prepare to answer one simple question. No matter what kind of interview you're doing, if it's a one-on-one interview, a screening interview, a recruiter interview, an informational interview, a video Zoom Teams interview, the one simple question you need to answer is basically this. Can you tell me a story about why you're a great fit for the job? Can you tell me a story about why you're a great fit for this job is a powerful question to prepare to answer because it's an effective way to communicate. Storytelling is the most effective way to communicate amongst human beings. And if you don't believe me, ask a caveman. We've been telling stories since before we had a language. We're painting on the cave walls. We killed a woolly mammoth today or whatever. And so storytelling, Stanford University did a study and they said that stories are 22 times more likely to be remembered than facts alone. And you remember a story. You could probably think back to your childhood of a favorite story you had, or if you've got little ones, a favorite story they have. And the elements that bring those stories to life, that's memorable. You kind of form this like Vulcan mind meld with people when you tell a story. It's almost like they feel what you felt at the time. But there's two parts of this question. Can you tell me a story is important. About why you're a great fit for this job is also very important. I had a cousin Bruce named, he's like my mom's cousin. I don't know what makes him to me. He was great at telling stories. Had nothing to do with like what was going on in my life. They were about like polar bears and stuff. We lived in New Jersey. There was no polar bears. He could tell a great story, but there wasn't any relevance. So we've got to make it relevant to what the employer needs to hear. And what they really need to hear is, so what? Why are you sitting here? Can you solve the problem that I have? While yes, you're going to talk about what you've done using the signs of a great interview to tell your stories, the interview really isn't about you. It's about what you can do for me, the prospective employer. And when you use the signs of a great interview to answer that one simple question, you'll be giving me so much more clarity and so much more detail that will help me see why you're a great fit. And when we walk out of that interview, we'll go, did you hear that story he told about helping the Norwegians and how they did their training and whatever? I always pick on the Norwegians. I just think it's a fun way to visualize like a specific story. And what I did there was I inserted a character into the story that I imagined in my mind. And that's a good way to check yourself as to whether you're telling a story or not. If you can't picture the setting and the character that you're talking about when you're giving a story about why you're a great fit for this job, you're probably not telling a story. Now, I will admit, you are very unlikely to hear this question in an interview. And I'm going to tell you a secret. It's because a lot of people aren't really good at doing job interviews. Like many times, the person you're meeting with is not a professional recruiter. They're a professional, whatever they do for a living, and they've got an opening. Oh no, we're shorthanded. Somebody quit or retired, or oh, we're growing the team. We need more help. They've got a problem to solve. And you might be the solution to that problem, which is why you're sitting there in the interview. They think one way or another that you may be able to help them solve the problem they're facing, that they don't have enough people to do the job. So if you get asked a question that is not this, it's because that hiring leader's focus is probably somewhere else. And frankly, they might have just Googled what questions to ask you. All right, questions to ask in a program manager interview. Great. What makes a great program manager? What's a great leader? And what's your greatest strength? And that's their interview prep. Well, no matter what comes out of their mouth, I want you to pretend that I have closed captioned the interview for you. And at the bottom of the screen, it says, can you tell me a story about why you're a great fit for this job? Because that's so much more helpful of an answer than what makes a great program manager. Well, a great program manager integrates well with others, has a plan and follows it, manages a budget effectively, and finds creative ways to get the job done. Yay. Congratulations. We've just defined program management literally everywhere, from the military to the Fortune 100. That's not a good interview answer because the question isn't, can you answer this question correctly? I gave you a correct answer to what makes a great program manager. But if a hiring manager hears what I just did, which is just a definition of a program manager, they're going to walk out of there going, I don't know, is that candidate a good program manager? Like they knew what to say, but can they do it? Contrast that with a story about why you're a great program manager. So the one simple answer to this one simple question is, well, great program manager inspires the team to get the program accomplished effectively. And let me tell you about a time when I did that. We were tasked with developing a program to train our Norwegian friends on some safety procedures that we used. Here's how I worked with them on developing that program, testing it, and getting 100 Norwegian sailors trained in how we do our work in the United States military. Isn't that so much more effective than simply defining what program management is? If you're just reading off dictionary definitions, you can just refer the recruiter to dictionary.com or Merriam-Webster and have them look up their answers. You don't even need to be there. So don't give me definitions, give me stories and tell them using the signs of a great interview. Let's go to our next idea here. And I call it the smart fifth grader test, because I really do want you to speak to civilians or hiring leaders like they're 11-year-old children to start. And that's because that's the context that most Americans have about what goes on in the military. I don't have to tell this audience that most Americans have not served, like me. I have not served. Most Americans are not even military connected anymore because there's such a small percentage of the population serving. They don't intimately understand what goes on. They don't have a direct, near, close family member who's in the service. So they don't know anything about what's going on. They know Hollywood and headlines, and somewhere in the middle of those two extremes is like the real work of the military. But you have to explain it to them in a way that makes it easy to digest the information, but more importantly, that makes it helpful for them. That shows them, okay, here's a very simple way to explain what I'm talking to you about in a way that's going to help you see why I'm a great fit for the job. So there's 3 simple questions on the Smart Fifth Grader test, and I have a detailed link on my LinkedIn profile. There's an article called the Smart Fifth Grader test. You can read in more detail, but the 3 simple questions are you using easily understood terms? I know acronyms are your friend in the military, and it seems like, especially the Navy, somebody gets paid to like make up the longest acronym of the week. I don't know. I'm just picking on the Navy. Like, it just seems like you guys have particularly long acronyms, but everyone's a little guilty of this. And frankly, so is the civilian world. We have our own acronyms and isms that we use. But if you're using terms like a training exercise prior to deployment, well, that makes sense to you, but to civilians, that sounds like doing calisthenics and push-ups before your parachute goes off. Like, those words exercise and deploy mean two different things. If you're talking about a joint force and you mean interagency or multifunctional, to me, joints are about arthritis and marijuana. So you really need to simplify the language and just say a training program or training or a collective team or a big team or a team that worked from two countries or two different groups or departments. Somebody who's in the know would go, oh, do you mean a joint force? Yes, sure, a joint force before our deployment for a training exercise. But most people are not in the know. So you simplify the language to the lowest common denominator of civilian understanding, which is about the 11-year-old level. And then you can talk up from there, depending on what you're learning about, how smart the civilian is around the topic. So clearly, if you're in cybersecurity and you're talking about cybersecurity terms, 11-year-olds are not going to understand that, mostly. I mean, I'm sure there are some bright 11-year-olds who know more about cybersecurity than I do. But a cybersecurity professional is going to understand cybersecurity terms as long as they're shared from the military to the civilian workforce. A good indicator of that is something like a job posting. If you go to a job posting for that company, even if it's not the one you applied for, but it's in a related field, and you see them talking about CISSPs and all these different kinds of tools that you might use in cybersecurity and, different acronyms even that you share, you can use those words because it ends up that recruiter or hiring manager is smarter than a fifth grader. But be mindful of language that you just use every day and might distance you from a civilian. I hear a lot of talk about, a 10-man team when I'm talking to special forces. Well, yeah, a lot of special forces are men, and most civilian workforces are not all men. And the second you say a 10-man team, you sound a little distant, a little like, how is this person going to work here? Like when they say manpower, we don't use that word. We mean workforce management. And it's a journey of discovery, and you're probably going to have the word soldier pop out of your mouth if you've been in the Army for 20 years. And you might say, oh, my sailors did this in the Navy. And you can catch yourself. You can go, oh, forgive me. I just mean my team. I've been calling my team have been soldiers for 20 years. So forgive me. My team was working with me. And here's a story about why I'm a great fit. I want you to focus on good news only. I recognize the business of fighting war is not always good news, but focus on the positives. What can you do for me? How can you help be a great fit for the job? And get to the point quickly. I'm told there's a military acronym that actually works beautifully here. BLUFF. Bottom line up front, do that. The way I think about BLUFF as a civilian is tell me a fairy tale backwards. They all lived happily ever after. Good news, because once upon a time, here's some details if you need it. The Norwegians, and we were training them on something about boats in the Arctic, or, well, they might be training us about boats in the Arctic. That's kind of their neck of the woods, right? I don't know. So that's the smart fifth grader test. If a fifth grader would understand you, so would a recruiter. Be wary of testing your own children with this, because if you've got a fifth grader in your life, they're probably just smart about the military by osmosis or diffusion or something. So just by being proximate to you, they know too much. Take their best friend out for pizza with them and then tell them the story and see what they say. The other idea I get asked a lot about is there's all these intangibles that it comes to, being a veteran, and this leadership capabilities and the moral compass veterans bring. And I agree. I've always said, I think veterans are some of our best employees. You're just some of the worst job candidates because this is not a process that you use to get new jobs in the military. So what's a way you can bridge that gap to talk about those intangible things and show a recruiter why you're a great fit? Well, I want you to tell them I'm a patriot, that you possess values, you're accountable, you're trainable, respectful, you take initiative, you're on time, probably early, and you're a team player. When you think about the qualities that civilian employers value, It's these qualities. When I think about what veterans bring to the civilian workforce, I think I'll give you these by default unless you prove me otherwise, right? This is just some of the many reasons why veterans and military spouses are such a great fit for the civilian workforce, because of the patriot qualities I'm describing here. And I don't need you to literally shout, "I'm a patriot," at your recruiter. That's probably not going to go over well. But I do want you to work these qualities into the stories that you talk about, because they're a way to help describe those intangible things that might not have a number ascribed to them, but that definitely are value you bring to the workforce. The last tip I'll share, and then we'll do some questions from all of you, is I get a lot of questions about, oh, what do I do after the interview? And for this, I'll just direct you back to your keyboard, because I want you to do what I call your QWERTY follow-up. And that is literally looking at your keyboard right underneath the signs of a great interview is the QWERTY keys. And this is an acronym that I came up with. The military can come up with so many acronyms, I had to keep pace a little bit. So my acronym is questions which elicited reactions and thank you. I just had to make it work with the keyboard, really. But I want you to think about the questions which were asked and the reactions they elicited from the listener. And then I want you to write them down. Many of you will be familiar with the term AAR, an after action review. That's what QWERTY is. You can definitely use the questions which were asked and the reactions you got from them to learn in an interview. And if you're learning in a job interview, then every interview was a success, whether you got the job or not. Now, I know you want to get the job, but by writing down the questions which were asked the second you leave the interview, and I mean like the moment you get into your car or on the city bus or the Zoom call ends, write them down, because you will start forgetting them. I promise. Like very quickly, they're going to leave your mind. Oh yeah, they asked me about training and I told them the thing about the Norwegians and they loved that idea. And if the answer was great, use that story again every time you tell an interview story. And if they went, the who, what, we don't work in Norway. Why would that be relevant to us? You say, this answer did not work. Need to rework or find a different example. And you're teaching yourself based on the elicited reactions of the listener. And the other note you're adding on your AAR, your QWERTY card, if you will, and there's a literal QWERTY card at the back of the book here, where you can literally take down some notes about what questions you got. What did the listener say? And what are some reminders for your thank you note? I do think you should write a thank you note. That can be email nowadays, unless you're applying at like the post office, or Hallmark, then I would probably do a written card. But otherwise, I think email's fine. It's a personal preference more than anything else. And in the thank you note, you can put little personalizations that you might remember the second you leave the interview. If you had walked into their office and it was full of pictures of them kayaking and you love kayaking, you could say, oh, it was great to be in a fellow kayaker's office. Thank you for taking time to meet with me. And again, here's just a reminder of why I'm so excited about this opportunity. Really personalize it. The QWERTY card helps you to help yourself always have a successful interview. So I'll encourage you to check out more of my tips in Signs of a Great Interview. The Veterans Edition is available wherever books are sold, mostly Amazon. And I'll also encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn. If we're not already connected, I please definitely encourage you to connect with me so we can learn from each other and my network becomes yours. I've got some great articles on there, including one about how to use LinkedIn for effective networking so that you can grow your relationships before you ever get into the interview. And so with that, I definitely want to wish you a career that is full of this. And I'll take some questions if you have any ideas on your mind that we have not yet covered that you'd still like to ask me. So let me open the floor, and Jordana can help me if I miss a question. Go ahead and put it in the chat, or can you do raise hand and come off mute? Let's see, who's got a question? Drop your questions here or in the Q&A. Yep, that's great. Thank you, Jordana. Questions that we have not yet covered about job interviews. Anything is a fair game. There's no such thing as a silly question with me. So if you want to know some deep psychology on how recruiters think, let's talk. And if you want to know, should you wear pants during a Zoom interview? Yes, you should. Let's see. I have the first question coming up here. Recommendations for video interviews. Yeah. a couple simple things go a long way. First of all, test your tech early on and make sure that you can hear yourself, you can connect. Make sure that you're aware of your background and your surroundings and lighting, what that looks like. A lot of people like have the window behind them and they look like they're in the witness protection program. Not very helpful. I will caution you now that this is like a pet peeve of mine in the world of recruiters, but I'll say it here so that you know it might happen. A recruiter might invite you to a video interview and not have their video on. It bugs the heck out of me because I want to tell recruiters, would you do this interview behind like one of those one-way mirrors at like the police department? No way, right? But they're essentially doing that if their camera isn't on. So be prepared and aware that their camera might not be on. And you even have my permission to invite them to turn it on. It's like, oh, Sally, thank you so much. I don't know that I can see you on camera. I'd love to see you face to face so we can connect. And it just might show that little bit of awareness of the value of interpersonal connection. And it's certainly going to make your life easier too, because now you could see what Sally's thinking about as you give an answer. And how did that answer go? And did that generate a laugh or a smile or a lot of note taking? So that's good. We got to talk more about that. Or a confused look, like you talked above the 5th grade level to them. So I hope that was helpful, Justin. Other questions? Let's go back to the chat. Yes, I see Q&A again from Justin. Working with recruiters, send resume before asking questions or no? When and if to talk salary? Seems like every recruiter is different. Yes, every recruiter is different. So should you send the resume before asking questions? I'm not sure I fully understand, but generally speaking, if you're talking to a recruiter, it's because you've applied to a job and they likely have their resume in front of you, the resume that you sent with the job application. Now, if you've made updates, you can certainly before the interview or even during say, as I've thought about this position, I've realized that I could better prepare your team to view my qualifications by adding a little extra detail some places. So could I send you an updated copy of my resume? It's fair game. There's no rule that says you're one resume and it's done. You never talk to me again. No, you could update it. So the idea of asking before questions, I'll say a broad statement, and then if I don't answer it, get me back to a different question, Justin, that I can help you with. Should you ask a lot of questions in an interview? Or what questions should you ask? Is a question people ask me a lot. And the simple answer to that is you could ask a lot of questions, but I don't want you to, because you're not there to interview me about what makes a great leader, Scott, and why did you join this company, and what's your philosophy on developing talent, or why is recruiting fun? None of your business. That's not the topic, and I don't care to tell you that. Might be my answers. I'm, as you imagine, happy to give those answers because I like talking to people and helping them. But recruiters, they're asking you, do you have any questions for us? Usually at the end of the interview, because that interview is over. That's like their polite way of saying, get out. We're done here. I've asked everything I need to know. But as a courtesy, you got any questions? So I think there's 2 questions that are fair game. Number 1 is, what's the next steps, please? Like, just hopefully they're telling you that. If everyone was great at recruiting, they'd be telling you that. And not everybody's great at recruiting. So, be prepared that they might not give you the next steps and help them out. And that'll put you at ease. Oh, all right, they're interviewing people for 2 weeks. I don't have to like bite my fingernails all weekend wondering if they're going to call on Monday. And it also tells you clear next steps. Like, here's the next interviews. The second question you can always ask is there anything we've not yet discussed that is critical for success in this job? Well, that's not a question many people were anticipating, but it's an important question to ask, because if there's anything at the back of their mind going, I don't know if this person could do this, you could save yourself. And they say, well, we really are looking for somebody with direct sales experience. And I appreciate that you've had a lot of, experience with relationships, but we need sales experience. You say, I'm glad you mentioned it. Let me tell you a story about why I'm a great fit for this job, and get as close to solving that challenge that you can. And there may be some, things that you just don't have experience in. And so you pivot to, oh, here's a way that I've learned another new skill. And because I know that I have A, B, and C, let me tell you a story about a time I learned a skill similar to sales that I think will help me learn in this environment too. If what they need is somebody with 20 years of sales experience, I don't know why they need 20, but you're not that person if you haven't worked in sales for 20 years. You're also a terrible candidate for an accountant if you're not an accountant. Like you're just not a great fit for every job. No one is. So that might give you some peace of mind to know, all right, there's a gap that I need to fill in. If that's something like a certification or training or learning you can go do, now you can go learn and do it. But I'll tell you the answer you're likely to hear to that question when you ask, is there anything we've not yet discussed that's critical for success? Their likely response is no. Because again, the interview's over and they're trying to get you out. So you have two options. You could say, thank you, or you can lob a Hail Mary pass of a story in there. Someday I'll have to tell you about how I trained 100 Norwegians in the North Pole. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Because I didn't mention there's actually a big training component to this. Could you tell me that story about the Norwegians at the North Pole? And now all of a sudden, you got a free bonus answer that I wasn't even going to ask you about, but you open that doorway a little. And the worst thing they could do is say, no, I don't want to hear any more of your stories. You're hired. You say, yay, great. And heck with your story. You can tell it at the water cooler. When to ask about salary. The general tactic here is a delay tactic. So don't lob numbers out there until they give you something. And if they don't give you something, ask. So I'm not an attorney. You should consult one if you need one. But the laws in some jurisdictions, including some enormous states like Colorado have a law like this, and some individual cities as well, is that an employer must disclose salary ranges. In fact, you're starting to see a lot of job postings where in the state of Colorado, the estimated range of this position is X to Y. Or we don't accept candidates from Colorado because they don't want to describe their salary requirements. They must tell you if you ask in some places, and only if you ask. So if a recruiter asks you, what are your salary requirements? It's a very simple answer. Would you please tell me what the salary range is for the position? If they tell you and you're happy about that, great. Say, oh, great. Well, thank you for that. And I'd love to start the conversation there. Whether that means it was a little low, way high, or just right on the money, you'd be happy to start the conversation. That's not saying, yep, I'll take that. It's not saying, oh, no. But all the recruiter's doing early on in the process is to make sure we're talking about the same ballpark here. If I think I'm hiring for a frontline entry-level role where I'm going to pay you $45K a year to do something that I'm expecting a new college grad to be able to do, and you're a retiring 06 with 30 years of experience and 2 master's degrees under your belt, we're probably talking about different jobs here. So we're trying to gauge, are we in the right neighborhood? Because there is this cat and mouse kind of thing about salaries out there. I kind of wish in this regard, the civilian world was a little more like the government, where I say, this is a civilian level 12, which is equal to a GS level 13, which is equal to an O, whatever. We're just not there. It's a competitive thing, and well, it'll never be perfect, but that'll get you close to that question. I see Don has a question. He says, how about the resume? Agree, most are poorly written. Any tips there? Moving from job, I mostly see to star or par telling the story. So moving away from job descriptions is absolutely the right thing to do. If what you're doing is writing the description of your job down on paper, that's not good enough, because I don't need a description of your job. That's for your old employer. Your MOS is between you and the Marine Corps, not me. Like, doesn't matter to me what your MOS is or your job description. So I'd much rather hear little stories about why you're a great fit for this job. So if you pick up Signs of a Great Interview, Veterans Edition, it's a complement to Signs of a Great Resume, Veterans Edition, where I describe that the best way to stand out on your resume is telling little stories about why you're a great fit. You're connecting these little vignettes in bullet form, if you want, to why you're a great fit. And the simple tip here on your resume could apply to the interview as well, but it's easier to visualize on a resume. So if you had your resume in front of you, I know this is my tip sheet, not a resume, and you just folded your name back off the top and reread what you had written, if it could be somebody else's resume, it's not good enough. I don't want to hire just somebody else. I get this a lot from people retiring from the military who are like, led a battalion of 300,000 or 3,000 people and, commanded this installation of all these millions of dollars in plans. And I said, that's great, Colonel so-and-so. Could the person who took the flag and replaced you say the same thing? He goes, yeah. I said, well, that's not good enough. Because if all I did was want the battalion commander from, XYZ, I'd just stand outside the gates of your fort and be like, hey, who's the commander? And is that person retiring? It's not good enough to tell me a job description, because definitionally everyone has the same job description in the same job. Like a lawyer who says, defended clients, represented them in court. Yep, good. That's what lawyers do. A teacher who taught classes and graded papers, that's what a teacher does. What did you do? Tell me your story about why you're a great fit for this job. One other thing you mentioned there, Don, which I'll touch on, the STAR format. I don't object to the components of the STAR format, which is situation, task, action, and result. I object to the sequence, because the situation and task you're in the military is not the situation and task I'm in the civilian workforce. So I prefer the RATS approach. And you can even make it a double R if you want. Relevant results and the actions you took to get there, because that's probably what I'm going to pay you for. It's going to be a different situation and a different task in the civilian workforce. We have a different mission. We're there for a different reason. It's not going to be identical. The actions you do are going to be very similar. In fact, if you focus on the behaviors and examples of you demonstrating behaviors in the military that are the same behaviors I want you to demonstrate in the civilian world, you'll make it super easy to see why you're a great fit for the job. That's how to tell the story effectively. So, RATS, not STAR. And Don disagrees on asking questions, want to know the company values and culture, how they live them out, investment in people. Don, I don't disagree with your idea at all that you should know those things. I disagree with the timing of asking them in the interview. So if you're investing so much time to get in front of a person and apply for a job and you want to work there, you should do what I'm told the military term is IPB, Intelligence Preparation of the Battlefield, long beforehand. And there's an article on my website, on my LinkedIn about networking, how not to apply for jobs. And that's where I want you to learn the company values and culture. How do they live them out? From people that are not invested in the hiring process. You know who you can go ask? Other veterans. I literally this morning, got an email or a LinkedIn message back from an Air Force veteran I had connected with, because he works at one of the big credit bureaus. And I had a colonel coming out of the Air Force who might investigate that as an employer. So I connected with the guy who currently works at the credit bureau and said, hey, I'm helping other veterans. I see you're one, and you came up in a search where I'm trying to help this vet connect with other people. I'll bet you one Air Force officer is happy to talk to another Air Force officer about the values of that credit bureau and whether they align with the Air Force values, and whether it was a great idea for him to work there or an awful idea. My guess is it's a great idea. He's been there some time. So it was an opportunity to learn that beforehand. And then you can be giving well-informed answers and to questions based on the intel that you gather beforehand. And that'll give you the inside scoop in a much more objective way. Because frankly, if you ask in the interview, like, do you really live out your values of A, B, and C that are on your website? Of course I'm going to say yes. Remember, I have a problem to solve. Shoot, we're shorthanded. Whatever you want to hear, I'm going to tell you. Now, I believe in full disclosure and transparency to the degree to which it would be allowed by company policy. And I would say, I don't know that I would use the words in those value statements. Here's how I see it happening in my part of the world, or here's what other hires have said. I would be more, forthcoming than perhaps others would be. That's my nature. I think a lot of other people are just likely to say, yep, that's our values. Mm-hmm. That's what the boss says our values are. So those are our values. We have them on our website, so they're there. And you're not getting good intel. Ask an objective party, and I think you'll get a lot better guidance along the way. I hope that today you've gotten some great guidance that you can put to work. I do hope that you'll connect. And I want to thank Jordana again for bringing us together. Please follow the Recon Network online and certainly connect with me and everybody else you see here in this session today. So Jordana, I'll turn it back to you.
Scott, thank you so much for all of that. As always, you are just a bundle of energy that we love having here. Just a great resource for everybody here. Guys, if you're not connected to Scott on LinkedIn, definitely make sure you check him out. If you've got your program downloaded, all you have to do is click on his face and you will head straight there. So we have about 15 minutes till the next session. This is going to be your last chance call to get your behind the scenes photos in. Tag #vets22 to count. I'm going to be drawing for that last Amazon card right after this next session. So you want to get that in, take a picture of yourself behind the scenes. What are you doing during the Vet Summit other than watching our speakers like Scott. Scott, thank you so, so much. We appreciate you as always and are honored by your presence today.
Thank you. Have a great one, guys.
Thanks.